probably what gave him away. I bet he was like, "Hey, I'm Steve Swordsman, and this is my partner, Sam Grifter, and oh, here's our third partner, Phil scams a lot."
Welcome to Garage Sales Unhinged.
Where the characters are as quirky as the finds.
I'm Julie.
And I'm Jake.
Join us as we dive into the wild world of garage sales, yard sales, estate sales, and anywhere secondhand sales are happening.
From bizarre bargains to hilarious haggles.
You won't believe the stories we've got lined up.
Let's get unhinged.
Jake, I'm going to ask you to visualize your background. And I want you to think about, let's say you were about 12 years old. It's in the middle of the school year. You had a stomach ache.
Okay.
And you have convinced mom and dad that you need to stay home from school that day. Okay.
Okay. I'm there. I'm very familiar. Sure.
And as most stomach aches go, you're totally, completely fine. But you're home alone because mom and dad both have to go to work. What do you do? What do you watch on TV to help you get over your quote unquote stomach ache?
Okay. I think everybody's got some, go-to thing that they remember. And cohorts of our age usually point to a game show, like a daytime TV game show of some sort. I'll give you a precise answer uh, in that category, and then I'll go to a different category. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So for as TV shows, right?
Mhm.
The game show category for me, the thing that comes to mind is Price is Right. Seeing Bob Barker going up there, and there's every episode is what is it episode? I don't know. Every taping, broadcast, whatever. You never know what game is going to show up, what prizes they're going to be. Is this guy going to bid $1 over? And it was an early understanding of what constitutes drama.
Yes.
And there's
Correct.
bright colors, and that was fun. And Bob Barker has this tiny little microphone, and like, wow, you've never seen one like that since. So yeah, Price is Right, and I would secretly pray the night before that one, I could stay home from school, and two, they'd play Plinko, and Plinko was the best. It was
Yeah.
totally, and I understand now. Back then, I thought I was like, oh, it's fun. It's bouncing around, and there's the colors, and there's the music, and whoa, where's it going to fall? And it was, preparing me for a lifetime struggle with gambling. Later, I understand, okay, that was the only game that really was just about whether God loves you or not. Everything else, there was some skill. Do I know how much the motorcycle costs? Do I, how hard can I spin the wheel? This is just,
Gravity
right,
and the Lord's blessings.
right. The other show was the Weather Channel.
Weird. What a weird kid you were. And also, all I needed you to say was Price is Right. And you went on this whole thing. And so I'm giving you no points. So,
Bum, 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 bum.
okay. So you and I both grew up with the best Bob Barker Price is Right. And today, in adult world, something that is very similar to the Price is Right for adults of that age, of that generation, is the PBS Antiques Roadshow.
Oh, okay.
So, for those that don't watch the Antiques Roadshow, watch an episode, especially if you grew up with Price is Right, because people bring things that they have in their house. So people bring their things from home and they bring it to experts, and the experts appraise it. And so, you could have this, and I think, and I love watching Antiques Roadshow. My husband is not a fan of it, but I love watching it because I'm like, I could own that thing that they said, there was only 5 made and it's worth $500,000. I'm like, we could be sitting on a gold mine. So far, I don't have that thing, but there's more episodes coming of the Antiques Roadshow, and it's everyone there is having a good time. I learn a lot about furniture, about artifacts, about like how things are created. It's a PBS, like it's great.
Sure.
So what does Antiques Roadshow and the FBI have in common?
What does Antiques Roadshow, the show, and the FBI have in common?
Yes.
Well, they both involve a three-letter acronym. PBS, FBI.
No, no, that's wrong, Jake. You're wrong. You get no points. So, I came across this very interesting story from the early 2000s
Okay.
where you had two appraisers from Antiques Roadshow were actually brought up on charges of racketeering and wire fraud.
Okay.
I know.
This sounds kind of juicy.
So if you like true crime, this is the episode for you. Um, so there's these two individuals. Their names are, let me make sure. And there's actually going to be a third individual, but he wasn't part of Antiques Roadshow. So we have Russell Pritchard the third and George Juno. They were appraisers on the Antiques Roadshow, and what they specialized in was Civil War era memorabilia. And how all this came about and how the FBI gets involved is because there's actually a department within the FBI.
While you're looking that up, I'm just like already suspect about anybody with a third in their name. Is like automatically, you're probably inherently evil because like it's Richard the third. The third of anything is a real problem. I'm saying this to the third child, in the house we grew up in, but it's always like Hickory, yeah, sure, fine. Dickory, yeah, you're good. Doc, fuck you. So
So the FBI, and as I'm reading this, I'm going, I didn't even know that this was part of our government system, but there is a art theft program that is part of the FBI. And so for people that they steal things from museums. A lot of vast majority of things that are stolen from museums are inside job. It's somebody that has worked there.
mhm.
They, and as I was reading this story about these two gentlemen, and learning more about how to commit museum theft. Don't do that, folks. Don't do that. That does not belong to you.
This episode is not about tips on how to break into the art heist world.
Don't do that.
Yeah.
Um, but a
Honestly,
lot of times,
I'd love to have that beat at the FBI. It's just tough when it comes to like interacting with colleagues in the lunchroom. They're over there, so I'm like, yeah, I'm really looking into those extremists, they threatening to blow up federal buildings. And this guy over here is like, I'm looking into the human trafficking thing. Oh, I'm looking into gun runners. And you're like, I'm working on pastels. I really tried my best to get the oils down.
the
I'll
cafeteria.
take the tuna salad.
No, now I'm giggling because now I'm just imagining the FBI cafeteria is just a bunch of cliques.
Right.
No one hangs out with the
No
art
one wants to set up
program
the art
people.
department. Like,
So, a lot of museum thefts happen because museums will put items that are going to go on display to put them into storage units, and they may sit there for several years before they actually go out on display. And so, if something from a storage unit goes missing, it's very hard to determine that it went missing for a very long amount of time. But I read that in an article. I don't know that for fact, so don't come after me, FBI, because clearly they're listening to this podcast episode.
Are you planning a garage sale, yard sale, or estate sale and need some help? Look no further than Garage Sale Supply. They provide top-notch resources and expert advice to help you host the perfect sale. From pricing tips to promotional strategies, they've got you covered. Visit garagesalesupply.com and make your next sale a success.
But there's the FBI art theft program. They got involved with this crime that happened with these two gentlemen that were on the Antiques Roadshow. So what actually happened is Russell and George, it's a very long play that they did. So what they did is that they had their friend, and this is in one of the articles, it's quote unquote, his name is Steve. And I was like, could you not make up a better name?
yeah, fake automatically. No one is named Steve.
Yeah, like,
You've
come
never
on.
been named Steve. It doesn't exist.
It's so generic. So Russell and George got their friend Steve to bring in a sword that they said it was from the Civil War era.
Okay.
Steve comes on the show. He's one of the segments where they actually air it. And
I really like the idea. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I just really like the idea of like they got off on the wrong foot just with their alibi name. It's like, okay, listen, man, you're gonna go in with this sword. Okay, got it. What's my alias? What do I go by? What's my name? Your name is Steve Swordsman.
so Mr. Swordsman brings in this sword, and they give a false appraisal of it
Okay.
on TV.
So he
And
comes in with a bogus sword, but they're like, "Whoa, this is the best sword. It's the most beautiful sword anyone's ever seen."
well, and it's something of like, hey, this sword you brought in, it's from this general that was in this
Right.
war, and it appraises for $10,000. Well, because you have people like me who's watching Antiques Roadshow, and I'm going, wait, I have a sword that's like that,
Oh,
and it's
okay.
not from a well-known general. Maybe I can get $10,000. So that's kind of where they started with this criminal thing that they were doing.
Okay.
Um, and then so they use Antiques Roadshow to essentially solicit future customers. And they actually had someone that came to them, or they were even going to other people that knew that they had some of this stuff. And they were saying, hey, we're appraisers. You can look us up on Antiques Roadshow. We have this appraisal company. They were working with a Civil War museum, and they were telling people that they were actually the buyers for the museum. They weren't. They were the middleman, and so like a museum would buy stuff from them, but they weren't working on behalf of the museum.
Okay.
And there was one individual who was directly connected to a Civil War general, and they had a lot of memorabilia from their family member. And they said, they would never have sold a lot of their stuff, but because it was going to the Civil War museum, they thought, you know what, I would love for that history to live on. And
Right.
yes, I want that to happen. So some of the numbers that these articles were sharing, they would go, and so this person's trunk of memorabilia, they paid this person $88,000 for it. They then sold it to the museum for $880,000.
Whoa.
And pretty much, uh, also, like, guys, come on. Pretty much everything that they did, and they did this to multiple people. So they would buy something for $27,000 and then resell it for $270,000. They were just adding a zero onto it.
And you're saying that the entire time, like the objects in question weren't even genuine.
No, no, no. These objects were genuine. So, but they were not actually. So, as
Oh,
an
so they were just
appraiser,
way undershooting the appraisal,
yes,
and then they turn around and like sell it for an actual appraised value.
yes.
But I hear what you're saying too. They're getting kind of lazy with the math. They're just like, hey,
Carrie,
an X.
move the decimal point.
Okay.
It's fine.
Yeah. All right.
Um, and really what Antiques Roadshow does now, and I think they were doing it back then, but they would do things of like, hey, if you take this to an appraiser and they say, yes, this item that you have is $300, I will pay you $300 for you. You don't want to sell stuff to that appraiser, because an appraiser is not supposed to do that, because you can't really trust of like, well, they said it was $300 and then they take it on Antiques Roadshow, and this appraiser who can't purchase it from you is going, no, this is actually worth 5 grand.
Yeah.
And so, like, again,
Yeah,
having
it's the opposite principle of like when you go to a restaurant and the chef there is like, "Oh, I'd never eat here."
right.
Right? You want them to eat there, but when it comes
Yes,
to an appraiser, you don't want them to eat here. Yeah.
exactly. And so these gentlemen were doing this for years. They were going to different people that they knew that they had memorabilia, and they were buying it low cost, selling it high, not just to museums, but to also private collectors and stuff like that. So they were essentially ripping people off and not
Mhm.
telling them, hey, you actually could get this amount for it. Um, and the way that I think it started to bubble up, you have a look
Well,
on your face that you're thinking,
well, but like what you're describing, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're just describing what the used car market is. I mean, like you like, hey, I've got this car that I want to sell to the dealership, and dealership looks at it like, oh, I don't know, I can give you $5,000 for it, and you're like, oh gosh, all right. And then the the body's still warm. You just left, and they stick a $15,000 tag on the car to sell to somebody else.
Well, with the used car market, we have tools like Kelly Blue Book that you can go and see what your trade-in value is versus a private sale. And so, and also the car dealerships know that their markup on used cars is not going to make them rich. They make their money off of financing. So, there's tools out there now that like, hey, if I'm going to resell this, there's tools out there that tell me how much this stuff is. However, for antiques and artifacts, there's not like I got a 101. There you have to find a specialist that knows how much this value is, that then they can help you like, hey, if you want to sell it, this is what you should be looking for. Or a lot of times, like, hey, this is something that's been in my family for years. I need to get it appraised so I can put an insurance value on it so I can take that to my insurance company to make sure it's covered in case of stolen property or fire or something like that.
These guys aren't offering any of that jazz. You're just showing up with the sword or the, letters
Yeah.
that were sent, to and from great great grandma during the Civil War period. And they're going, it's nice, I guess. It's worth probably this. And they're like, oh, thank God they took that because we just bought it from them and we're going to sell it times X 10.
Well, and I think a lot of these people that have this memorabilia, they don't want to sell it. But whenever they think of, oh, my family's legacy can live on in a museum.
Right. You feel like you're doing the responsible thing. You're doing the thing that honors time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So instead of it sitting up in my attic, it's gonna be something worthwhile that the community can see. It can be logged. We're not gonna lose it
Right.
to the ages. So what happened is that they actually bought several items from the family of Confederate General George Pickett. Specifically, that's the one where they paid the person $88,000 and then turned around and sold it to a museum for $880,000.
Yikes.
And the only way that that family member knew that they got bamboozled is that they were at an event with another Confederate Civil War, not even Confederate, it's just a Civil War appraiser. And they were talking about, oh, yeah, well, I just sold a bunch of items to this thing. And I think there was something in this auction. I think they were at an auction. There's something in the auction of that was similar to something that they owned, that they had previously owned before they sold it. And the person next to him going, that's actually worth $50,000 to $100,000.
Hmm.
And that was one item in this collection of things that they had given to these two gentlemen. And working with this other appraiser, they started to do some digging. This other appraiser was able to get them the actual amount of money that the museum paid these gentlemen for those things. And then that's whenever they started to realize something's not matching up. And the FBI get involved. Your person at the lonely lunch tables going, oh, I got a job. This is great. And so they started tracking what these guys were doing. Another situation that they did is that they bought a Civil War uniform from a family. Their family member had worn it. They had kept it as a keepsake. They bought this Civil War uniform again for pennies on the dollar and sold it to a museum.
Okay.
Well, then a couple of years later, these guys bought a similar uniform thinking like, oh, if we're going to be able to like make more money because we just bought something similar. Well, it wasn't the same type of Civil War uniform. It was actually a Belgian uniform.
Oops.
And so not the same prominence, not the same value to it. And so they actually broke into the museum and replaced the uniform that they sold to the museum with the Belgium uniform, and then took the original Civil War uniform and sold it to a private collector.
Wow. This is like a great movie.
Yeah. Of just a bunch of stupidity. Like, I think it's like, guys, come on, you don't do this. And the reason that I mentioned Russell Pritchard III, because his dad, Russell Pritchard Jr., is also in the mix with this.
Okay.
So while Russell Pritchard III and George Juno were on Antiques Roadshow, Russell Pritchard Jr. was I think he might have been the curator for a museum. And so he was also in on valuing stuff, trying to purchase things, using museum money to, all that
And
stuff.
clearly he had the connections with the museum, world
Yeah.
that led like, were inroads to being able to offload these things.
Yes. And and as I was looking at like, well, these guys, one, they were on the hook to pay people back. And then two, the maximum amount of jail time that they could get, prison sentence, was going to be like north of 20 years. And I'm going, that's
Wow.
crazy. I mean, granted, like you shouldn't commit crime, but also like people get a lot less for a lot worse crimes. If we're gonna do like comparison.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think when it came to sentencing, they didn't actually get the 20 plus years. They got several months. But they also had to pay back restitution, and also they're no longer on Antiques Roadshow. But it was kind of this journey as I'm reading through all this stuff of going, okay, one, there's an FBI department that I would be interested. So if someone's listening from the FBI and you have something about garage sales, call Jacob and I up. We're
Yeah.
here for you. But also like, it's also one of those things of like, what do you do with an art degree? You go work for the government.
That's
That's
right.
what
You
you
put
do.
away Hannibal Lecter.
Yeah. So one of the articles I read was a lady who was the former manager of this FBI department. She was doing a speech at a university or something like that, and I'm like, oh, if I had one, I didn't even know that that was a thing. Two, I know that she'll give speeches, and I'm like, three, I want to go to one of her talks. Like she mentioned, like there's other stories that they talked about where she was talking about the museum heist and stuff like that. But yeah, I thought it was such an interesting thing of like one of my favorite shows of Antiques Roadshow had a whole criminal enterprise going on, and they
That's
were using the
right.
prominence of the PBS Antiques Roadshow to solicit customers and saying, "Oh yeah, well we're so great at what we do. We've been on this TV show to do it for the masses." And in the whole time they're just stupid criminals
That's
that people off.
amazing. Well, and kind of like fortunate that Antiques Roadshow didn't like catch too much flack about all of it. Like it didn't get besmirched, and also like it also the Civil War. Good thing it didn't get controversial.
Anyway, well, so the Antiques Roadshow, as much as I love them, I think there is a smudge on them because even after, and these two guys actually, I can stop calling them gentlemen now that we know that they've like,
Yeah, they're just guys now. Look at Steve's. They're Steve Swordsman. That was really what gave him away. I bet it was like, hey, I'm Steve Swordsman, and this is my partner, Sam Grifter. And oh, here's our third partner, Phil Scams a lot.
well, and so the Antiques Roadshow, even after the indictments came out, they did not remove these gentlemen from the show because they didn't
Oh,
think that the indictments actually impacted what these two gentlemen were doing on the show. Now, since they both were pleaded guilty, they didn't go to jury. They did a plea deal. They're no longer on the show because I'm like, hey, that's a tarnish. You should not. And also the other appraisers are like, listen, that's not what appraisers do. You can't make an offer to someone of something that you just appraised for them. And I'm gonna read off the list of charges that these guys came up with. Um, sorry, this is just for George Pritchard III, Russell Pritchard III.
okay.
His indictments were 6 counts of mail fraud, 3 counts of wire fraud, 3 counts of false statements and ancillary to a court proceeding, and 1 count of tampering with a witness. And
Hmm.
also, if found convicted, he was going to face 60 years imprisonment and $2,750,000 in fines. And Juno, the other gentleman, George Juno, he faced 45 years imprisonment and $2,250,000 in fines.
Yikes.
That's not the years that they got.
Right.
And also, I don't think that was the fine that they paid. They could have. I was trying to find like, well, what was the outcome of it, and everything's buried and I can't find it anymore, which again makes me think, like, is there a conspiracy here? Do we need to know how much fines they paid and how long they stayed in prison?
I wonder, like, so what kind of prison knuckle tattoos would you get if you got caught in this whole scheme? Like, I would get, like, on one hand, it's ANTI, and the other one is QUUE, and then you can get ones that say on these knuckles it says road, and then these it says show.
That would also assume that we're going to end up in the same prison system.
This story, it's phenomenal story. I love the part where they break in to swap out the uniforms. The fact that there's an actual physical heist that happens, like that's what for me made it kind of go, oh wow, now this is a movie moment.
But like, imagine like switching out the uniform on like a wax figure. It's not like on just like the mannequin with no head. It's like, the actual an actual wax figure and like trying to undress a wax figure in the middle of a heist and like, well,
You love it.
all right. Well, that is our episode for this week.
Thanks, Julie. I'll talk to you next time. Take care. Thanks for listening. Bye.